Burma, 1944. An unarmed American cargo plane laden with supplies is ambushed by a Japanese fighter. With no defensive weapons, the pilot, Captain Wally Gayda, reaches for his personal weapon, a Browning automatic rifle, BAR. What happened next would be etched into the memories of the Japanese military. To understand their deep-seated hatred for this single firearm, join us as we uncover the dark reason. Forged in crisis. The Browning automatic rifle was the heart of their squad's firepower for most American soldiers and Marines in World War II. A typical infantry squad of a dozen men had rifles, maybe a submachine gun or two, but usually only one weapon capable of sustained automatic fire, the BAR. The man carrying it was called the Bar Man, and he was both the most powerful and the most targeted soldier in his unit. To understand why this weapon became so essential, you have to go back to the First World War. In early 1917, as the United States prepared to enter the war, military planners faced an embarrassing crisis. The war in Europe had become a meat grinder dominated by machine guns. Yet America, about to send millions of men overseas, possessed exactly 1,110 machine guns in its entire inventory. It was a pitiful number. American soldiers would have to borrow weapons from the French and British. From France, they received the Chauchat, a light machine gun rushed into production with cheap materials and poor craftsmanship. It jammed constantly. It failed in mud, dust, and even clean conditions. The men who carried it gave it a cruel nickname, the Damned and the Jammed. Trusting your life to a Chauchat was a gamble you usually lost. With troops already sailing for Europe, legendary firearms designer John Browning took action. He traveled to Washington, D.C. carrying two prototype weapons he wanted the government to see. One would become the M1917 heavy machine gun. The other was something new, a Browning machine rifle, the weapon history would remember as the BAR. Browning arranged a live demonstration for an audience of 300 people. Congressmen watched. Senators watched. Generals and military buyers watched. Browning fired his new rifle and it performed flawlessly. Fast, accurate, reliable. The demonstration impressed everyone so deeply that Browning received a production contract on the spot. The BAR had thoughtful details that showed Browning understood combat. Look at the selector switch above the trigger. F meant semi-automatic fire, 1 bullet per pull. A meant full automatic. S was safe. But between A and S, Browning placed a small spring-loaded button that stuck out slightly. If a soldier charging an enemy position tried to switch from semi to full auto, that button prevented him from accidentally pushing too far and landing on safe. In the chaos of an assault, that little button could save a man's life. The BAR fired about 550 rounds per minute. It worked through dirt and rain that would stop lesser weapons. Soldiers used it to sweep through enemy trenches, firing from the hip as they walked. It provided covering fire so riflemen could advance. Compared to the worthless Chauchat, the BAR was a gift. But the war ended in November 1918 before the BAR could reach most American units. It saw limited action, barely a taste of combat. Its story, however, was not finished. The BAR would wait more than 20 years for its real test. And when that test came, the enemy would learn to fear it. Reforged for war after World War I ended, the BAR went into storage. For 20 years, it sat in warehouses, waiting. But by 1940, dark clouds were gathering over Europe again, and American military planners knew they might need every weapon they could get. They looked at the old BAR and asked a question. Could it be better? The original M1918 BAR was designed for one job. A soldier would walk forward, firing from the hip, sweeping trenches. It had a semi-automatic mode for aimed shots and a fast automatic mode for close combat. But by 1940, the Army saw the BAR differently. They didn't want a walking weapon anymore. They wanted a light machine gun that could sit at the back of a squad and lay down heavy fire while riflemen moved forward. So they redesigned it. The new version, called the M1918A2, became the standard in 1940, and the changes were significant. First, they removed semi-automatic fire completely. That might sound strange. Why take away the ability to fire single shots? Because the Army decided the BAR's only job now was to throw lots of bullets at the enemy. They wanted it to be a machine gun, pure and simple. The selector switch now offered two automatic rates, a slow setting around 300 to 450 rounds per minute, and a fast setting around 500 to 650 rounds per minute. Soldiers called them slow and fast, and most preferred slow because it was easier to control. To make those slower rates possible, engineers added something called a rate reducer inside the gun. Think of it like a shock absorber for the moving parts. It slowed everything down just enough that the gun wouldn't jump all over the place when you fired it. This also helped with overheating. A fast-firing gun gets hot quickly. By giving soldiers the option to shoot slower, the BAR could keep fighting longer without the barrel smoking. They also added a bipod to the front, 2 little legs folded under the barrel. When you set the gun down on the ground or a wall, those legs held it steady. The stock changed too. The old BAR had a simple curved butt plate that fit against the shoulder. The new A2 model got a hinged butt plate that could fold down to create a sort of hook. They added a carrying handle behind the rear sight. It looks simple, just a folded piece of metal, but if you have ever tried to run with a long, heavy rifle, you understand why that handle mattered. You could grab it and move quickly without the barrel swinging into trees or doorways. The impossible shot. When American troops took the bar into the Pacific, they discovered something important. The jungles where they fought were nothing like the fields of Europe. You could not always see your enemy. Sometimes they were hiding behind thick leaves and vines. Sometimes they were dug into small bunkers made of dirt and logs. The BAR solved this problem beautifully. The .30-06 bullet that the BAR fired was big and heavy, and it traveled fast. A regular rifle bullet might get knocked off course by a small twig. The BAR's bullet punched right through, and when it hit those Japanese field fortifications, the ones made of logs and packed dirt, it often punched through those too. A Japanese soldier hiding behind a palm log thought he was safe. Then the BAR opened up and bullets started coming through the wood like it was paper. But the BAR's most incredible moment, the one that soldiers would talk about for years, happened not on the ground but in the air, and it happened in a place that most Americans knew nothing about: Burma. By 1944, the war in Burma was brutal. The jungle there was thick and wet. The hills were steep. Disease killed as many men as bullets did. The Japanese had tried to invade India that spring, sending thousands of soldiers through these jungles toward the towns of Kohima and Imphal. For months, British and Indian troops fought them in some of the worst conditions imaginable. The Japanese lost more than 50,000 men in that campaign alone. Many died from starvation and sickness as they tried to retreat through the jungle. It was one of the biggest defeats Japan had suffered in the war. In the middle of all this, American planes flew constantly over Burma. They carried supplies to Chinese troops fighting the Japanese. They dropped food and ammunition to British units cut off in the jungle. It was dangerous work. Japanese fighters patrolled the skies, looking for slow, fat transport planes to shoot down. One of those Japanese fighters was the Nakajima Ki-44, which the Allies called Tojo. It was a mean little plane. Unlike the famous Zero, which could turn on a dime, the Ki-44 was built for speed and climbing. It could go over 370 miles per hour. It carried machine guns and cannons in its wings. If you were in a slow cargo plane and a Ki-44 found you, you were usually dead. On a day in 1944, an American C-46 cargo plane was flying over Burma. The pilot was Captain Wally Gayda. His plane was packed with supplies. He had no guns on board. Cargo planes did not carry weapons. They were not supposed to fight. They were just supposed to deliver stuff and go home. Then a Japanese fighter appeared. It was a Nakajima, and it came straight for Gayda's plane. The pilot knew he was in trouble. His plane was big and slow. The Japanese fighter was fast and deadly. There was nowhere to run, nothing to hide behind. He could not outrun it. He could not outturn it. But Gayda had something with him. He had a Browning automatic rifle. As the Japanese fighter lined up for its attack, Gayda opened his cockpit window. He stuck the bar out into the wind, rushing past the plane at hundreds of miles per hour, and he started shooting. Think about how hard this is. You are sitting in a shaking airplane. Another airplane is flying toward you at high speed. The wind is screaming past your face, trying to tear the rifle out of your hands. You have to aim at a tiny target moving faster than anything on the ground, and you are shooting a rifle that was never designed for this. Gayda held the trigger down. The bar barked and jumped in his hands. Tracer rounds streaked toward the Japanese plane. And then, impossibly incredibly, one of those bullets found its mark. It smashed through the canopy of the Japanese fighter and hit the pilot. The Nakajima wavered, it nosed over, and it plunged into the jungle below. A cargo pilot with a rifle had just shot down a fighter plane. When word of this got around, it must have driven the Japanese crazy. They had spent years building advanced aircraft. They had trained pilots for thousands of hours. They had machine guns and cannons mounted on their wings. And one of their fighters was brought down by a guy sticking a ground gun out a window. This was the kind of weapon the BAR was. It was tough. It was reliable. It could shoot through jungle brush. It could punch holes in bunkers. And if you absolutely had to, you could even use it to win a fight against an airplane. The Japanese had every reason to hate this gun. The bar did not fade away after World War II. When American troops went to Korea in 1950, the bar went with them. Men like Donald R. Troops carried it through the freezing hills and rice paddies, just as soldiers had carried it through the jungles of the Pacific. It served in every major theater of that war, still doing the same job, laying down heavy fire while riflemen moved forward. And when the first American advisors went to Vietnam, the BR went too. It saw action in the early years of that war, though new weapons were starting to replace it. By the late 1950s and early 1960s, the US military phased out the BAR. Newer guns like the M60 and later the M249 took its place. But for the Japanese soldiers who faced it across the Pacific, who heard its distinctive bark from behind logs and bunkers, who watched it punch through cover they thought was safe, the bar left a mark. They would not forget it in a hurry.